The Honorable Gramsci may speak. The proposed law against secret societies has been presented to the House as a proposed law against Freemasonry. This is the real act of fascism to assert what the Fascist Party calls its revolution. We, as a Communist Party, want to seek out not only the reason for the presentation of this bill against all organizations in general, but also the meaning of why the Fascist Party has presented this law as directed primarily against Freemasonry. We are among the few who have taken fascism seriously, even when fascism seemed nothing more than a blood-stained farce, when fascism was discussed in the common terms of war psychosis, when all parties sought to soothe the working population, presenting fascism as a supernatural phenomena of very short duration. In November 1920, we predicted that fascism would take power, a thing then inconceivable to the fascists themselves, if the working class did not take arms in time to block its blood-stained advance. Fascism then today declares itself to be practically conquered the state. What does this expression, now become a cliche, mean? And what meaning in this sense has the struggle against Freemasonry? Since we think this phrase of fascist conquest to be one of the most important undergone by the Italian state, and even as we represent the interests of the majority of the Italian people, the workers and peasants, we believe that an analysis of the question, even if rushed, is necessary. What is Freemasonry? You have spoken at length on the spiritual significance, the ideological currents which it represents, but all of these forms of expression which you use only to convince yourselves. Freemasonry, given the manner in which Italy was united, given the initial weakness of the Italian capitalist bourgeoisie, Freemasonry was the only real and effective party which the bourgeois class has for a long time. It must not be forgotten that little less than 20 years after the entry of the Piedmonts into Rome, Parliament was dissolved and the electoral body of about 3 million was reduced to 800,000. This was an open confession by the bourgeois of being a very weak minority of the population. If after 20 years of unity, it was forced to adopt the most extreme dictatorial measures to maintain power, to crush its class enemies, which were the enemies of the unitary state. Who were these enemies? They were mainly the Vatican, the Jesuits, the Honorable Matea, must be reminded how, as well as the Jesuits who wear the habit. There exist lay Jesuits, who have no special symbol which indicates their religious order. In the early years after the founding of the kingdom, the Jesuits stated in a series article published in Civilita Catholica, the political program of the Vatican and of the classes which are represented by the Vatican, that is the old semi-feudal classes, Bourbon by tendency in South, or Austrian by tendency in Lombardy Veneto, numerous social forces which the capitalist bourgeoisie has never maintained to contain, even though in the period of the Regimoso it represented progress and a revolutionary beginning. The Jesuits of Civilita Catholica, and thus the Vatican, made the first point of their political program the sabotage of the unitary state. Through parliamentary abstention, the obstruction of the liberal state in all its activities which could corrupt and destroy the old order. The second point, the creation of a rural reserve army to place against the advance of the proletariat, as since 71, the Jesuits foresaw that on the field of liberal democracy, the proletarian movement would be born, which would develop into a revolutionary movement. The Honorable Martyr has today declared that the spiritual unity of the Italian nation, at the expense of Freemasonry, has finally been achieved. Since Freemasonry in Italy has represented the ideology and the real organization of the capitalist bourgeois class, whoever is against Freemasonry is against liberalism, is against the political tradition of the Italian bourgeoisie. The rural classes, which we represented in the past by the Vatican, are today mainly represented by fascism. It is logical that fascism has replaced the Vatican and the Jesuits in the historical task, by which the most backward classes of the population bring under the control of the class, which has given progressive in the development of civilization. This is significance of the achievement of the spiritual unity of the Italian nation, which would have been a phenomenon of advancement 50 years ago, and today is instead the largest phenomenon of regression. The industrial bourgeoisie has not been capable of slowing down the workers' movement, has not been capable of controlling the workers' movement, or the revolutionary rural movement. Thus, the first instinctive and spontaneous watchword of fascism, after the occupation of the factories, was this: the rural will control the urban bourgeoisie, who do not know how to be strong against the workers. If I have not deluded myself, then, Honorable Mussolini, was that not your thesis? And between rural fascism and urban fascism, you said you preferred urban fascism. I must interrupt you to remind you of an article of mine in praise of rural fascism in 1921 to 22. But that is not purely an Italian phenomenon. However, much in Italy, with its weaker capitalism, it had the greatest development. It is a European and a world phenomenon of great importance in understanding the general post-war crisis in the domain of practical activity and the domain of ideas and cultures. The election of Hindenburg in Germany, the victory of the Conservatives in England, and the liquidation of the representative liberal democratic parties are the equivalent of the Italian fascist movement. The old social forces, though not completely absorbed by it, have been taking control of the organization of the state, bringing into their reactionary activity all the depth of ferocity and ruthless decision, which has always been theirs. But in substance, we have a phenomenon of historical regression, which is not and will not be without implications for the development of the proletarian revolution. Examined on this ground, will the present law against the associations will be enforced, or is instead destined to be futile? Will it correspond to reality? Will it be a means to stabilize the capitalist regime, or will it only be a new instrument given to the police to arrest Tom, Dick, and Harry? The problem then is this: has the situation of capitalism in Italy been strengthened or weakened since the war by fascism? What were the weaknesses of the Italian capitalist bourgeois before the war? Weaknesses which brought about the creation of the Masonic political system which existed in Italy, which had its greatest development in the Gioia di Mosso. The greatest weakness of Italian national life were, in the first place, the lack of raw materials. That is the impossibility of the bourgeois creating an Italy industry which would have deep roots in the country, and which could develop progressively, absorbing the surplus of the workforce. Secondly, the lack of colonies tied to the mother country, thus the impossibility of the bourgeoisie of creating a labor aristocracy which could be permanently allied to the bourgeoisie itself. Thirdly, the southern question. That is the question of the peasants, closely tied to the problem of immigration, which is proof of the inability of the Italian bourgeoisie to maintain. Germans also have immigrated by the million. The significance of mass immigration of workers is this: the capitalist system, which is the dominant system, is not capable of giving food, housing, and clothing to the population, to a not insignificant part of this population, which is forced to emigrate. So the nation must expand in the interest of the proletariat. We have our own conception of imperialism and colonialism, according to which there are, above all, an export of finance capital. Until now, Italian imperialism has consisted only of this: the Italian emigrant worker works for the profit of the capitalists of other countries. That is, until now, and Italy has been a means of expansion for non-Italian finance capital. You rinse your mouths with declarations of a claimed democratic superiority of Italy over all countries. You always say, for example, that Italy is demographically superior to France. This is a question which only statistics can finally resolve, and I sometimes deal with statistics. Now, statistic published after the war, and never denied, and which cannot be denied, states that pre-war Italy, from the democratic point of view, was already in the same situation as France after the war. This is determined by the fact that emigration removes from the national territory such a mass of male, economically active population that the demographic relations become catastrophic. In the national territory there remain the old, women, children, invalid. That is the inactive part of the population, which weighs on the population to a greater degree than in any other country, even France. And this is the fundamental weakness of Italian capitalist system, for which Italian capitalism is destined to disappear even more rapidly as the world capitalist system no longer manages to absorb Italian immigration, to exploit Italian labor, which our capitalism is incapable of organizing. The bourgeois parties, Freemasonry, how have they tried to resolve these problems? In Italian history, we know about the last two political plans of the bourgeoisie to resolve the question of the governance of the Italian people. We have the Giolitti program, the collaboration of Italian socialism with Giolitti Mosso. That is, the attempt to establish an alliance of the Italian industrial bourgeoisie with a certain northern labor aristocracy to oppress, to subject to this bourgeois proletarian grouping of the mass of the Italian peasantry, especially in the Mezzogiorno. The program did not succeed. In southern Italy, a bourgeois proletarian coalition has established through parliamentary collaboration and politics of public works. In southern Italy, the leading class is corrupted and dominates the mass of goons. You fascists have been the major authors of the failure of this program, as you have impoverished equally the labor aristocracy and the poor peasantry of all of Italy. We have a program which we might call the Corriere della Sera, a newspaper which represents no mean force in national politics. 800,000 readers are also a party.
Fewer. Half. And the readers of newspapers don't count. They have never made a revolution. The readers of newspapers are regularly wrong.
The Corriere della Sera does not want to make a revolution.
Nor does the Il Unita.
The Corriere della Sera has systematically supported all the politicians of the Mezzogiorno, from Salandra to Orlando, to Nidi to Amendola, in the face of Giolitti's solution, oppressive not only of the classes but even of the whole territories, such as the Mezzogiorno and the islands, and thus as dangerous as the current of fascism. For the same material unity of the Italian state, the Corriere della Sera has always supported an alliance between the industrious of the north and a certain vague, mainly southern rural democracy on the ground of free trade. One solution, and the other tended essentially to give the Italian state a larger base than it had originally, and tended to develop the conquest of the region more so. What do fascists propose against these solutions? They propose a law supposedly against Freemasonry. They claim to want to conquer the state. In reality, fascism struggles against the only effectively organized force with the bourgeoisie in Italy to supplant it in occupying the posts which the state gives its civil servants. The fascist revolution is only the replacement of one administrative personnel by another,
and of one class by another, as happened in Russia, as normally happens in all revolutions. We will methodologically do.
It is only revolution that was based on a new class. Fascism is not based on a class that was not already in power.
But if a large part of the capitalists are against, but if I list you the major capitalists who vote against us, who are in the opposition, the Motas, the Contraire,
and they subsidize the subversive newspapers.
The directors are not fascist, and you know it.
The reality, then, is that the law against Freemasonry is not principally against Freemasonry. In the end, fascism will easily come to compromise with Freemasonry.
The fascists have burnt the Masonic lodges before making the law. There is no need for accommodation.
Fascism uses against Freemasonry in a more intense form the same tactic as it used against all the non-fascist bourgeois parties. First to create a fascist cell in those parties, then try to extract from the other political parties the forces most useful to it, not managing to take them all over instead. You call us fools? You would not be fools if you knew how to solve the problems of the Italian situation.
We will solve them. We have already solved many of them.
Fascism has not managed to completely absorb all the parties into its organization. With Freemasonry, it has employed the political tactic of noyé tannage, then the terrorist system of burning lodges, and finally employs legislative action, through which certain persons of a company boards and high bureaucracy will end up giving in to the masters, so as not to lose their jobs. But the fascist government will have to compromise with Freemasonry. What do you do when your enemy is strong? First you break his legs, then you make a compromise from a condition of obvious superiority.
First you break his ribs, then you imprison him, as you've done in Russia. You've taken your prisoners and you hold them, and you need to.
Taking prisoners means exactly making compromises. Thus we say that in reality the law is especially made against workers' organizations. We asked why for many months without the Communist Party being declared illegal. The Cabriani have arrested our comrades every time, and they find me at least 3.
We're doing what you do in Russia.
In Russia there are laws which are obeyed. You have your own laws.
You have big roundups, you do well too.
In reality, the police apparatus of the state already considers the Communist Party a secret organization.
That's not true.
Insofar as anyone accused of no specific offense found in meeting of these 3 persons is jailed, just because they are communist.
But they are soon released. How many are in jail? We pick them up, just find out who they are.
Is a government a systematic persecution which proceeds and will justify the application of the new law? Fascism is adopting the same systems as government of Giolotti. You're doing as Giolotti goons did in the Medjugorje, when they arrested opposition voters to find out who they were. There was one case of it. You do not know the South. I am from the South.
With respect to electoral violence, I remind you of an article by Boarding which fully justifies it.
You, Honorable Gramsci, have not read this article. Not fascist violence. Ours. We are representing the majority of the population, of representing the most essential interests of the majority of Italian people. Proletarian violence is thus progressive and cannot be systematic. Your violence is systematic, and systematically arbitrary, because you represent a minority destined to disappear. We must say to the working populations what your government is, how your government conducts itself, to organize against you, to make it ready to defeat you. It is most probable that we too will find ourselves forced to use the same system as you, but as our transition, occasionally, certainly use the same systems as you, with the difference that you represent the minority of a population, while we represent the majority.
But why do you not make the revolution? You are destined for the same end of Babakchi. They will throw you out of the party.
The Italian bourgeoisie, when they made the unification, were a minority of the population, but since they represent the interests of the majority, even if it did not follow them, were able to maintain themselves in power. You won by arms, but you have no program. You represent nothing new or progressive. You only taught the revolutionary vanguard that only arms in the final analysis determine the success of programs and non-programs.
Do not interrupt.
This law will not manage to slow down the movement which you yourselves are preparing in the country. Since Freemasonry will enter the fascist party en masse, and will form a tendency within it, it is clear that this law you hope to impede the development of large worker-peasant organizations. That is the real value, the real meaning of the law. Some fascists still hazily remember the teachings of their old masters, from when they were revolutionary and socialist, and believe that a class cannot permanently remain so and develop itself up to the conquest of power, without having a party and an organization, the best and most conscious part of itself. There's something true in this sinister reactionary perversion of Marxist teachings. It is certainly very difficult for a class to reach the solution of its programs, and to reach those ends which are built into its existence and into the general strength of society, without a vanguard constituting itself and carrying this class to the attainment of these ends. But it is not said that this statement is always true. Such dogmatism is foreign to reactionary purposes. This is a law which serves for Italy, which must be applied in Italy, where the bourgeoisie have not managed anyway and will never manage to resolve in the first place the question of the Italian peasantry. So resolve the question of southern Italy. Not for nothing is this law presented at the same time as some projects concerning the reclamation of the Mezzogiorno.
Talk about Freemasonry.
You want me to talk about Freemasonry? But in the title of the law, there's not even a hint of Freemasonry. It only speaks of organizations in general. In Italy, capitalism has been able to develop insofar as the state has represented on the peasant populations, especially in the South. Today, you feel the urgency of this problem, so you propose $1 billion for Sardinia. You promise public works and hundreds of millions for the whole of Mezzogiorno. But to do such serious, concrete work, you start by resorting to Sardinia, the 100 to 150 million in taxes that you extort from the Sardinian population every year. You should restore the Mezzogiorno, the hundreds of millions of taxes which every year extort from the southern populations.
You don't impose taxes in Russia?
They steal in Russia, they don't pay taxes. That is not the question, honorable colleague, who should at least know the parliamentary reports on these questions which exist in the library. It does not deal with the normal bourgeoisie mechanism of taxation. It deals with the fact that every year the state extorts from the southern regions sums and taxes, which it does not restore in any way, neither through services of any kind.
It is still not true.
Sums, which the state extorts from the southern peasant populations to give a base to the capitalism of northern Italy. On this field of the contradictions of the Italian capitalist system, there will necessarily form, notwithstanding, the difficulty of building large organizations, the union of workers and peasants against the common enemy. You fascist government, notwithstanding your demagogue speeches, have not overcome this contradiction, which was already fundamental. You have instead made it more strongly felt by the popular classes and the masses. You have worked in the situation for the necessities of the situation. You have added new dust to the already accumulated by the development of the capitalist society, and you believe you have suppressed, with a law, the most lethal effects of your own activity. This is the most important question in the discussion of this law. You can conquer the state. You can change the laws. You can seek to stop organizations from existing in the form in which they've existed up till now. You cannot prevail against the objective conditions under which you are constrained to move. You will do no more than force the proletariat to find a direction different from that up to the most commonly followed in the field of mass organization. We want to say this to the proletariat and the Italian peasants' masses from this platform, that the Italian revolutionary forces will not allow themselves to be broken, that your sister dream will not succeed. It is very difficult to apply to a population of 40 million inhabitants the systems of government of Kankov. In Bulgaria, there are a few million inhabitants. In any case, despite the aid from outside, the government cannot manage to defeat the coalition of the Communist Party and the peasant revolutionary forces. In Italy, there are 40 million inhabitants.
The Communist Party has fewer members than has the Italian Fascist Party.
But it represents the working class.
It does not represent it. It betrays the working class. It does not represent it.
Yours is consent obliged with a stick.
You're talking about Mijoli.
Exactly. The Mijoli phenomenon has great importance in exactly the sense of which I said earlier, that even the Catholic peasant masses are turning to the revolutionary struggle. Nor would the fascist newspapers have protested against Mijoli if Mijoli phenomenon had not had great importance in showing the new organization of the revolutionary forms as a function of your pressures upon the working class. In conclusion, Freemasonry tips the scales in favor of the reactionary anti-proletarian measures. It is not Freemasonry which matters. Freemasonry will become a wing of fascism. The law is intended for the workers and peasants, who will understand so very well from the use that will be made of it. To those masses, we want to say that you will not succeed in suffocating the organizational forms of their class life, because against you stands the whole development of Italian society.
But do not interrupt, let him speak. You, however, Honorable Gramsci, have not spoken to the law. The law is not against organizations.
Honorable Rossoni, it is itself a section of the law against the organizations. The workers and peasants must know that you will not succeed in stopping the revolutionary movement, strengthening and radicalizing itself, because I am only stating today the situation of our country.
Honorable Gramsci, you repeat this idea 3 or 4 times. Please, we're not jurors who need to be told the same thing many times.
It must be repeated, however. You must hear it till you're sick of it. The revolutionary movement will defeat fascism.